Hello and welcome to the June edition of Coffee with the Pastors. I'm Pastor Daniel Hanson. I'm joined today by Pastor Dan Dahl and Pastor Dan Gerrietts. We have our favorite beverages with us today. We hope you grab a cup of coffee or whatever you're drinking this morning or this afternoon or this evening, based on whatever time you watch this, and join us in a conversation about Trinity's life and mission. Now, I have to ask as we start today, we've had some sweltering June weather this year. My question is to start today, is coffee still the beverage of choice when the Lord blesses us with such heat?
Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah, me too. I'm still drinking coffee, but I don't drink it outside.
There we go. There we go.
Yeah, the gnats might get in it.
Yeah.
Right. Yes.
Well, I also continue to be connected through coffee throughout all seasons of life, and so I'm just curious, but I'm glad to hear that we continue to be united as one, even in coffee, even when the conditions are otherwise. But that kind of, maybe that's a funny way to get us into our theme for today and talking about the church being together, living as church together. And we're thinking about a theme for this week. And one of the ideas we talked about is we just got back from Synod Assembly, and we'll share about that in a moment. But one of the things that I'm cognizant of every time I go to Synod Assembly is that we don't live on an island as the church, right? So many of our own experiences of church are located in a particular congregation. Maybe if we've only been in one congregation in our whole life, that's our imagination and that's what our lived experience is of church. But whenever I go to Synod Assembly, I'm reminded that the church is this huge place, right? It's that we as a congregation are just one of many members. And so I thought today we could explore some of the different ways that we do ministry together as the church and celebrate the ways that God works through those ministries in ways that we couldn't live ministry out alone singly as a congregation. So I thought we'd start out with Synod Assembly today, which was just last weekend, just a week ago. The Northeastern Iowa Synod met in Decorah, Iowa. And for those who've never been to Synod Assembly, first you're missing out. But maybe Pastor Dan, you could tell us a little bit about what happens at Synod Assembly and who goes and what do we do on that day together?
Sure. Yeah, so Synod Assembly is basically it's the main legislative gathering of the church within our synod that happens during the year, and so it's the highest legislative authority group. When the assembly comes together, they have the power to change the Constitution, to do just about anything within the parameters of how we've set the church up, but they only meet once a year, and so each church sends voting members to the assembly, and the number of voting members that you can send is based on your baptized membership. So Trinity sends 7 lay people, voting members, 6 adults and 1 youth, and then our pastors are voting members, and that's the same in every congregation. There are lay voting members, and then the called rostered leaders in that congregation are also voting members, and we all come together. And what happens at assembly is worship, often really rich worship. We have plenary sessions that are basically business sessions where topics are talked about, resolutions are brought in advance. We always have some elections for different committees, synod committees, and delegates to the voting members to the church-wide assembly, which is the national church gathering that happens every 3 years. We hear reports from synod staffers, from the bishop. This year, we heard some stories around our theme of growth in faith, hope, and love. So we heard 3 different stories of growth in hope and growth in faith and growth in love. And those I thought were really, really powerful. It was a little shorter this year, right? Like we used to in Northeastern Iowa meet Friday evening, basically through Sunday noon. And the past couple of years, we've shortened it to an evening and a day, so Friday evening and a day. And now we're only going to actually meet for Synod Assembly every other year. And then in the off years, have kind of an educational training, learning event for anyone from any congregation. So it won't just be the people that are appointed to go as voting members from a congregation, but anybody can go to those in-between years to learn about faith formation or mission, or we don't even know yet what they're all going to be. But yeah, that's the gist of it. And you also, you get to eat a lot.
Yes.
Lots of eating happens at Synod Assembly.
Absolutely. Well, I'm curious, Pastor Dahl, does that sound like what your experience was? Because you've served in some different synods in
Yes.
the Southern United States. Does that kind of sounds like what your experience was for a Synod Assembly, or was it a little bit different?
Well, the key is food, like you brought up. There's just so much food, a gathering, but without going overboard. But it's delicious. We gather around the table, we talk, and there's always time for that, whether it's at the place, the setting, or in venues around where we are. But yeah, it's usually like the Southeastern Synod and North Carolina. They also worked on decreasing the amount of time that people gather together. It seemed like North Carolina was out in front a little bit. They already every other year they're going to start, and so the next, like here, the next year would be gathering for interest groups and that kind of thing, hoping that congregations would participate because it's not an obligation, but it's a gathering of how are we to do ministry in our place together and with one another. So yeah, it's pretty much the same. Business has to be done. And usually there's a connection with the ELCA. There's a representative who gives a pep talk and wonderful talks, or there's a theological theme of some kind. And we all gather in round tables, hundreds of us in a big room, usually. But I think their idea of going from Friday to Sunday was no longer the case, especially post-pandemic. I don't know if that had something to do with it, but people are just wanting to go Friday afternoon through Saturday noon, kind of like here. Yep.
Well, whenever I would talk to a delegate about going to Synod Assembly, people would say, "Well, do I want to go to a business meeting? Right? Does that sound like the most exciting of my Saturday?" But I would always try to share, whenever I leave Synod Assembly, I've always left on a good feeling, right? And I've tried to say, well, why is that? And I think I'm curious to hear if that's your experience too, and what you take away from these gatherings. But two of the things that that I so much enjoy about these gatherings are, first, being together as a synod, right? It's one thing. I don't know how many congregations are in Northeastern Iowa anymore. It's over 100 in some capacity. And it's fun to see us all gathered in the same space, to be this reminder of, oh yeah, those are the Decorah people, right? And those are the Dubuque people. And those are my Franklin County people from before, right? It's this chance to say that we're not numbers on a piece of paper. We're not ambiguous somethings somewhere else, right? These are real people, right? Who are going to go back to their own congregations, who are doing ministry in their own context. So I love making the connections and finding out what other people are up to, and seeing old friends, and then worshiping together, right? There's something special about assembly worship that maybe it's because as the pastor, I'm not leading worship, so it's really nice to just worship. But right, like these are people who are super dedicated in their faith, and it's just really powerful for me to worship with those folks, and for that weekend to be together to do that. So that's why I always say it's a really worthwhile experience for people who've never done that before. But I'm curious, what are something you've enjoyed about assembly in the past, or found meaningful about that gathering, even if the business side of it isn't the most exciting to someone?
For me, honestly, it's been some of the change, I think, in the tone and the purpose of Synod Assembly. I was ordained in 2004, and those that have been around the ELCA for a while know that those kind of late 2000 years in the ELCA were some pretty bumpy, conflict, contentious kind of years, especially around things like Synod assemblies and churchwide assemblies, in part because the ELCA was dealing with the issue of homosexuality and how to bless, or whether to bless and ordain people in committed relationships. And, my first experiences at Synod assemblies were times when we were trying to figure that out together as a church. And there was a lot of conflict and a lot of not a sense of unity, right? We were talking about the things that we were divided about. And so that was kind of my first experiences as a pastor around Synod Assembly. I don't think I had been to a Synod Assembly other than when I was a pastor. So so that was interesting. And then what I observed happened in the years following, about 2008, 2009, as we moved past that big moment of kind of contentiousness in the ELCA, was the Synod Assemblies suddenly swung very much the other way. No longer were we bringing resolutions that were going to create heated conversations and votes that we didn't know how they were going to turn out. The Synod Assemblies became, in the kind of the 2010s, I think in a lot of synods, more about mission and ministry and celebrating the work that we can do together, and why we need to do things together, because, you know, how we can do that as congregations together better than congregations alone. And so for me, then Synod Assemblies did become a much more of what you said, Daniel, about you left feeling really positive and like you had learned about the great work that we do as people together. But I can't say that was, I mean, there was some of that, I think, in those early years, but I think a lot of it was overshadowed by just sort of the sense of conflict. So I've really appreciated that. I enjoy that. Now I find almost there's very little of those kinds of things. We kind of go, yeah, there's things that we could talk about that we disagree about, but are they core? Are they central to the church? And if not, do we really want to spend the time and energy at these gatherings doing that, or do we want to just enjoy thinking about and working and praying for what we can do for God's kingdom together as church? So that's something I really like now.
Yeah, I've seen a few assemblies through the years, and you're right. Sometimes you're left scratching your head with all the divisiveness. Other times you celebrate the joy of unity. But nowadays it is you're focused outward, more mission. One thing I've noticed through the years, and I guess this happened, maybe quite a few years ago, there was always the evangelism committee that brought up new programs for churches to reach out. And eventually, then through the media, through the years, it was on CDs, and then pretty soon it was downloaded, whatever. There'd always be these tons of programs till eventually, at least in one synod, I guess it's all about just relating with people, telling the story. So they stopped pumping out programs and then just start telling stories and having people tell their stories of their faith and encouraging people to be evangelists by telling the story. I thought that was an interesting movement out of just having to come with 20 programs, how to reach out, with illustrations and actually go through the process, even practice. But it's almost telling the story.
Almost part of the kind of the flattening of the church, right? That there was a mindset at one time that, we're an institution that works best from kind of the top down. You get your smartest people together, you create programs, you pass them down. And there's a growing sense now that sometimes some of the best new ideas come from the ground level, so to speak, right? And are shared and are lifted up.
Yeah. Yeah, well, and actually this area had a beginning. There was a resource center in Clear Lake for years. That was kind of the precursor of people sharing ideas. So now it's online, but people would come from all over, not just Northeast Iowa Synod. But when I came to visit, I'd go over there, get some ideas, go through things. Congregations sharing ideas, not just keeping, and it was great. So I think there is more of that, not from top down, but you're right. People just, here's what works, and are willing to share that.
I thought that was something that was really effective about this year's assembly was the storytelling and hearing the stories about growing in faith, hope, and love. I knew the folks who started the food shelf in West Fork in Sheffield, and so it was really fun to hear. Those were my neighbors, and so to the north. So it was really fun to hear how they started a food pantry, where their struggles were, how they got connected to the community, and how the community helped take that over. And those are inspiring, right? Like, those get you excited to do ministry. And for me, they help ask the question, well, what is God calling us to do in our place, right? If we can see how God has worked in this particular place, what might God be calling us to do in our place. Cool. Well, there was something we heard about at Assembly from our bishop, Bishop Jones, about something he is doing with some local bishops. And Pastor Dave, maybe you could share a little bit about what's going on with RAGBRAI this year.
Sure. Yeah, absolutely. The three bishops of the three Iowa synods. So in Iowa, we have three synods or kind of regional groups within the ELCA. There's Northeastern Iowa, Southeastern Iowa, and those are basically the northeastern corner and the southeastern corner, and then Western Iowa, which is basically kind of the western half of the state. Those are our three synods, and the bishops of those three synods have committed to ride RAGBRAI this summer and together, and they're inviting people to ride along with them. They are inviting people to pray for them and support them. But maybe most importantly is they are using this as a way to raise money for hunger ministries within the church. And so there's a website we've been lifting it up here at Trinity in our communications that you can learn about all the details around that and exactly what they're going to benefit and some of the training rides they've done, those kinds of things, but also an opportunity to give. They want to raise, I think, $50,000 for hunger ministries among the three synods. And so if you would like to give to that effort, you can do that through our website. We've got a tab on our giving page, and our members that have been on there should be familiar with that. You can also, if you're using envelopes or checks, you can just write RAGBRAI or Bishop's Ride or something like that on there, and we will make sure that that gets to that effort. But I thought it was fun at Assembly that Bishop Jones talked about his training. He said, I think at one point he said yes to this a little too quickly, but he also said, I think at Assembly he'd ridden like 300 miles or something like that already. Like he's put in some miles, so they're all working and getting ready for that. And I think it's a really cool way to raise awareness around hunger ministry.
One of the things I really appreciated that as he was introducing this, was he said, this isn't a competition between the three synods to see who can ride farther or raise more money, right? But this was really an event of we're doing something together, right? Between our three Iowa synods. And I thought that was just a really beautiful image. And I thought that was a really neat way for the bishops to show that unity and leadership, and to say, we're all doing this together. And I hope it does raise a bunch of money. I hope that does motivate us all to support that. But I just think what a beautiful image. I'm imagining some riders from Northeast Iowa and Western Iowa and Southeast Iowa. It doesn't matter where they're from, right? They're just riding together in missions. So I think
really great. I was just going to say, I think it's really great leadership about how to be church together, right? Sometimes I think synods in the ELCA, I don't know about necessarily in Iowa, but synods in the ELCA can sometimes be like congregations where we get really focused on what we're doing in our place, or we even maybe have a little bit of a sense of competition with those around us. And I think it's beautiful that our bishops are setting an example that no, we really are best as church together, and that we should work to be partners all across the different expressions of the church, whether it's at the local level or the synod level, or even across the church-wide body. So I just think this is a great example of that. Our three bishops in Iowa, I think, are really collegial in their relationships with each other.
I have an example of that in '88 when we came back from Brazil and transitioned to get a call here back in the States. The call process was a little different. You wrote to the bishop, and it was a little different process. But I wrote different letters for see where we're going. We eventually did end up in Florida. But I wrote one letter to North Carolina, and at that time the bishop wrote back, we only accept pastors who were born and raised in North Carolina, and that's who we call back to North Carolina. Now the irony of all this is that when I went to serve a couple years there to help a congregation, both actually celebrate their 150th. That's why I was called there. And it was to the congregation where the bishop was raised. So you see how far the church has come, But it is interesting. Some synods just only called their own.
That's crazy.
Yeah. So But nowadays, it is more open that way.
Yeah. Wow, that's incredible.
I think ELCA World Hunger and some of our hunger ministries have been, for a long time, one of the great ways that the church has worked together really well. I'm always blown away whenever I see the videos that they put out about how much money is raised each year and about the ways in which that supports both domestic and global initiatives, using best practices to raise people out of poverty in sustainable ways. And I'm always in that, oh man, open up my wallet, right? Can you take all my money, right? Because it's such an important ministry, but also just the spirit of working together is just so profound. I looked up because I was curious, and it was almost $23 million CA World Hunger raised last year.
And growing.
Yeah, and it's just amazing to see that. And I know Trinity for a long time has supported World Hunger. What are some different ways that we've done that through this congregation?
Yeah, there's a lot of ways actually. Some of the simple, more traditional ways of supporting World Hunger and relief, both through ELCA World Hunger and also through Lutheran World Relief, which is a kind of a partner organization, but a different organization. I mean, things from quilts and baby kits and school kits, that's always been a part, I think, of the ministry here for a long time. ELCA World Hunger, though, specifically, we have some individuals that are extremely generous toward that financially, and we as a congregation have been pretty strong. I know a number of recent years we've been one of the top 10 or 15 giving congregations in the entire ELCA to ELCA World Hunger and disaster relief. We've often taken special offerings when disasters happen. We have done some special projects, like just this past year, we supported a ministry in Cairo, Egypt during our anniversary. We supported a ministry in South America to the tune of several $1,000s. And of course, during our T150 project, again, that would be on the Lutheran World Relief side, we did the Bihar partnership, about $100,000 that we gave to that as a part of 10 congregations who each gave $100,000 to very quickly multiply a development project around food and microloaning in Bihar, India, really the northern part of India, and just an amazing program that impacted something like 40,000 people, I think. So I've always loved that part of this congregation, that there is deep and wide passion for global ministries, particularly global hunger ministries, on top of all the local ones too. I mean, we have so many people that are active in the way they share their time, talent, and treasure with Community Kitchen and Hawkeye Harvest Food Bank and so many other food ministries, the Jams Backpack Program. So lots of ways that that hunger care happens here.
Cool. Well, I thought we could close out today talking about some other experiences that we've had of church together, right? Of seeing the church. Maybe that's the church gathered in one place. Maybe that's an outreach ministry of the church. But expanding our imagination of the church beyond our walls, the church working together. So I'm curious, in your ministry, where have you seen church together in really profound ways?
Dan, you want to take this one?
Yeah, sure. Well, all through the years, I'm a big believer in getting outside of the church walls. Pretty much stagnate if you just kind of focus in on yourself. The Lord wants us to go beyond ourselves, our buildings, even sometimes our sometimes we think, oh, we got to do so much around our community, which is true, but beyond our community and the state and so forth. So it is always a joy when congregations gather together as conferences and synods. But one thing I enjoyed when I was a missionary in Brazil, when the conferences would get together, we would actually go to the pastors go to a person's house in the community. And then, because we were all scattered, but each pastor had like 6 to 10 congregations. So, and then we'd stay there for a couple days and get to know the ministry in that setting, which was interesting. And then the bishop would come and stay in each parish. Like in my setting, it was 6, would stay for 3 days and go to each congregation and get a sense of walking together with the people there, so that when the synod met, the bishop would really know what's going on, while having walked with the people and the council and so on. I found that fascinating, that people would take the time to do that. A bishop and then the pastors and lay leaders take extra time to, not just for meetings, but for meal, and to get to know the ministry of the area, which was fascinating. Yeah.
I could think of several. One for me, in my first call, I served 2 rural ELCA churches in Northwest Iowa, and they were among about 7 or 8 in a 15-mile distance from one end to the other, because they had all been started mostly by German immigrants about 150 years ago, just far enough apart that you could get there in a horse and buggy in a reasonable amount of time. So they were all about 3 miles apart from each other, kind of scattered across this section. So my favorite memories from that first call were the times that we came together with 5 or 6 or even 7 churches for like Thanksgiving services or maybe Lenten services, and that sense of like we all live next to each other. It was all very rural, open country, so we had similar kind of work and vocations, but to break down a little bit of that parochialism that's so natural in those churches and part of what makes them so strong, to go, it's okay, we can all meet over in this building together and share worship. And that was so powerful, not only for us as leaders, but I think for the people in the churches, that was really powerful. So that's my first. Another one for me was the ELCA youth gathering. When I was in high school, I will never forget being in Atlanta in 1994 and walking into the Georgia Dome. I think it was the Georgia Dome at that time. And there were like 30,000 ELCA high schoolers all under the same roof. And growing up in a town of 1,000 people, where we had a nice youth group of 15 to 20 kids sometimes, but to be with 30,000 and you all had this thing in common, and it was not only our faith tradition but just faith, that was very powerful for me, and something that I will not forget at all. So those are a couple for me that are really powerful experiences of church together.
Yeah, I have to just add this one story concerning the youth gathering. I went on the one from Trinity after I graduated from high school, so I went that summer along with 2 buses from here, because there were more from other churches. But I'll never forget, there were 15,000 in the Madison Square Garden of New York, and of course being in the big city for the first time. But the speakers, the collegiality, the excitement, it just stirred me up. Probably planted even more seeds on heading toward the ministry, besides the Bible camp experience. And it was fantastic. And then coming back, the theme was "And We Say We Care." And Pastor Hanson had invited me to do a 6-minute message at each service. And so I did. And it was "And We Say We Care." Kind of just explain what's going on and my perception of idea, thoughts of it. And it was fantastic connecting with people there. And the congregation was very supportive. Remember, it was the summer of 1970. A lot was going on in our country at that time, amongst young people especially, and the parents trying to figure out all the young people, and they just were thrilled that we had a great experience in New York.
Youth gathering was the first thing that came to my mind too. I went to Houston and as a leader, and then San Antonio as a high schooler, and yeah, it just sitting in those massive stadiums and just being like, look at all these people, right? And and being able to gather around, right, a shared faith, right, a shared, even though we came from many places, even though we probably wouldn't agree on everything, right, there was still this shared sense of we're Lutherans, right, we're people of faith, and yeah, that continues to be a very vivid image. In a smaller way, that connects for me to summer camp, right? And we're just wrapping up VBS. We had VBS this past week, and I remember visiting with the program director at Riverside one time and talking about the number of churches that send campers to Riverside, and it was just astronomical. It wasn't that there's 4 big churches that really send them all their campers, right? It was the number of churches that send 4 or 5 campers each and every year, and so I would love if I'm a map person, so I want to do this for everything, but like I would love like for each week at camp to see where everybody's from, right? Where you have all the counselors put a pin, right, where they came from, and to see all the different campers put a pin where they live, and just get this sense of, right, we come from all these different places, but we're gathered together for this week at camp. And so so for me, our many expressions of camping ministry, I looked up this week because I was curious, and I think there was over 120 or 140 ELCA camps across the country, which I would have thought there was way less than that. But just to think about all the different people that gather into those places, whether they're Lutheran or not, coming together. And those are the definition of being church together, right? Because it's not the church building, right? They're coming together for that time away to be in God's creation and to grow in faith. So yeah, I'm inspired by these examples, right? That we're not just doing ministry out on our island here, even though this island of Trinity is pretty awesome, right? Really, our ministry is together, right? We're a part of the Synod, we're a part of the ELCA, we're a part of the body of Christ. And what a joy it is to not have to serve by ourselves, but to serve together. So maybe you have an experience of church together that was really inspiring to you. Maybe you went to a Synod assembly, or maybe you had a totally different experience than what we've talked about today. It'd be really fun for you to include that in the comments and share that with others and find out all the ways that Christ gathers us together as one. Any other thoughts for the good of the cause today, or?
Mhm.
All right. Well, thanks for joining us. We'll look forward to checking in with you next time. And until then, God's blessings. We'll talk to you later.